Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Logistics Launchpad webinar series. I am Ted Bagelin, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this webinar series where Flexport and our friends at ONTAP Consulting talk about the needs of fast-growing businesses. I'm the general manager of Flexport's small and medium business group, where it is our mission to make global trade easy for everyone. And today we are talking about one of the most important topics, which is getting your product into the hands of your customers. Sounds like an essential piece of making global trade easy to me. Before we go in, I'm going to give some useful tips about the On24 webinar platform that you're using. In the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you're going to see a couple options. One option is to talk with one of the experts at ONTAP. So if you have any questions that come up through the webinar, it's a great resource for you to use. You'll also see options to download the presentation slides, download a logistics manager's playbook. So all those options are in the bottom left-hand corner. In the top right-hand corner of your screen, you should see an option to sign up for future webinars in this series and in other series. And then on the right side of your screen, you should see an option for Q&A. So if a question pops up for one of our presenters over the course of the webinar, please don't hesitate to ask that question. We will get to as many of them as we can. The next housekeeping item is a quick disclaimer, so take a second to read this disclaimer before we get into the content. Okay, I'm also very lucky to have two fantastic co-hosts with me. Both are truly experts in their field. I'll start off with Mark Williams. Mark leads the Sales ONTAP division of ONTAP Consulting, where he also serves as managing partner and has helped dozens of manufacturers launch and grow efficiently at retail, including companies like Tile, Eargo, and SimpliSafe. Prior to ONTAP, Mark led sales teams of numerous venture-backed consumer electronics companies, including Anki, Kobo, and Flip Video. So welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Ted. Happy to be here.
We'll also have Michael Hajadian with us. So Michael leads Flexport's warehousing organization globally. Since the team's launch in 2017, Flexport's warehouse network has grown to over 36 CFS facilities, consisting of 5 Flexport-operated sites and 31 partner facilities in Asia, the US, and the EU. Prior to joining Flexport, Michael was at Amazon, where he was a product and operations leader, building out their reverse logistics capabilities for their trade-in and rentals program. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Ted, for having me. Really excited to be a part of the conversation.
We have a fantastic set of topics today for everyone. We'll start off with the essential question first, which is, why are we talking about getting your product into the hands of customers? Why is that so important to us? Then we'll go to a very pertinent question, which is retail. Why, when, how? That's really Mark's area of expertise, so he'll help us there. Then Michael's going to lead us through a conversation on distribution and fulfillment networks, making sure that all of your sales and marketing decisions are paired with the right operations decisions. We'll talk a little bit about how you experiment in the right ways. The nature of experimenting with your product and these decisions has changed over time, and we're going to give some useful tips and tricks on how you can experiment with your product the right way. And then we're going to wrap up with a couple other items. So we're going to talk about selecting the right partners for your journey, and we're going to include some pro tips from Mark and Michael from some lessons learned the hard way over time, and we'll end with some Q&A. So make sure that you're using that Q&A widget, and we will work to get all those questions by the end. So why are we here, right? And at the end of the day, it's all about these magic moments that everyone's looking for. So if you're a business owner or a business leader, what you really crave is that feeling of making a product that people want and getting that product in their hands and then seeing and hearing their excitement and happiness. At Flexport, we call that seeing our customers' products out in the wild, and truly nothing makes us happier. So in pursuit of these magic moments, one of the key questions is, why is it so hard? Why does it sometimes feel like there's a lot of friction on that journey of making a great product and actually getting it to your customers? And we're really going to attack that from 2 different angles. Mark is going to help us attack this question from the sales and marketing angle. So we're going to talk about decisions that you can make along that sales and marketing journey. And Michael is going to help us analyze it from the operations and distribution decision angle. And it's really important that those two strategies play nicely together. So if they're not in harmony, then oftentimes you can get bad outcomes. The good news, though, is when you make the right decisions, you can unlock growth and you can get more of these magic moments. So why is it challenging, though? And what are some of the demands of the modern marketplace that have made this an even more relevant topic? Well, there are some recent trends that have undoubtedly put pressure on your decision-making and your execution. Namely, consumers have really changed their expectations for ease of purchase, ease of return, and then the ability to both consume reviews and give reviews. And the reality is that a lot has been written on this. This is not slowing down. If anything, it's speeding up. And this has implications for the decisions that you make in sales, marketing, and operations. The next trend is that standards have increased for delivery. And again, I had this very succinctly summarized to me by a business leader who said, it used to be big beats small, beats slow. And a lot of the retail partners that you're working with have fully digested this, meaning that they are expecting more speed, higher consistency, and overall higher standards for how they work with you. The third trend that we're seeing is retail consolidation. Mark can tell some good stories, and I'm sure he will on this webinar, about visiting various retailers 20 years ago when he was making certain sales decisions. And that landscape has changed dramatically. We now have fewer retailers that exercise much more power in the marketplace. And so getting it right with those retailers is much higher stakes. Oftentimes there isn't a second chance with those retailers. So it's no longer a safe space to experiment. And so we've seen much more pressure on your execution at the retail step because of this consolidation. The good news, though, is that both Mark and Michael have navigated these questions successfully for years. So through the course of this next hour that we've got them, they're going to give you very practical advice on how to navigate this landscape effectively so that your business can grow, you can be profitable, and you can get more of those magic moments with your customers, which we all crave so much. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Mark, and he is going to tackle that very substantial question of retail. And so I would love to pass it off to Mark, who will dive into the next topic.
Great. Thanks so much, Ted. So that is really the question. Why retail? And the obvious answer is it's a chance to sell a lot of product, hopefully make a lot of money. Retailers also have a ton of customers. So this could be a great way to drive awareness of your product, especially if you're launching a new product or a new category. Of course, why not retail? Well, it's pretty expensive. I'd say most suppliers that haven't yet worked with retail have some understanding that working with retail can be expensive. They know retailers have margin requirements. There might be some advertising and marketing dollars you need to spend, but oftentimes you don't understand the operational complexity that comes with working with a retailer. And if you don't get all the operations in place, you could wind up burning a bunch of money. So the goal is to be like the top there, where retail helps you drive a lot of cash, but at the same time, you're doing it right so you're not burning a lot of cash. So Michael, I know the operational side is your area of expertise. Why don't you share some context there?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So from my perspective, it really just all starts with, in retail, it's the concept of the routing guide. So if you're not familiar with the routing guide, it's a document that most major retailers publish that is going to lay out the rules and requirements for distributing into their network. So maybe asking yourself, well, what makes this complex, right? Well, there's a couple of things here. From a routing guide perspective, is that no one routing guide is the same. So if your strategy is to go into 10 different retailers, unfortunately, your team's going to have to get familiar with 10 different routing guides. The second thing is that routing guides are not static documents. They're continually changing, right? So for example, if you got 5 months under your belt distributing into the Best Buy network and you're doing well at it, and Best Buy decides to change the routing guide, unfortunately, your supply chain is going to have to adjust. And then the last thing I'll call out here is that routing guides are long. They're not just quick one-page documents that you can skim through. Unfortunately, they're dense documents with a lot of details They cover things like cargo specifications, carrier requirements, and trucker appointments. So again, it's not necessarily an easy read. These are 20-page documents that, again, are very dense with a lot of details. So, in summary, I think the complexity is really driven from the routing guide and how those things are always changing. Just one other quick comment here on the routing guide, or a little tip or trick here. Generally speaking, the larger the retailer you're going into, unfortunately, the stricter they're going to be with you meeting those routing guides. And then there's also consequences. So if you're already fulfilling into the Amazon FBA network, you're very familiar with probably chargebacks and fees. That is not unique to, obviously, Amazon. Every other retailer is going to have something similar. So, always be on the watch out for the chargebacks and the fees. Even worse yet, you could have your shipments blocked or potentially even be blacklisted for future shipments if you're a repeat offender. So just a few things to call out there on operational complexity in the retail space. So Mark, I'll kick it back to you and we can keep going.
Thank you. So I'd love to start with a poll just to understand kind of where everyone is right now in your process of working with retail or your sales channels generally. And the question here is, what is your biggest sales and marketing pain point with your sales channels today? Now, we're going to talk about the operational and logistics pain points a little bit later. So for now, just on the business side, the marketing and sales side, is it that you're trying to figure out which retailers and key sales channels to sell through? Have you figured that out? And now the challenge is trying to win placement with those retailers and sales channels that are appropriate for your business. Do you have placement in the places you want, but now you've got to figure out how to expand those sales? Or is it profitability? You got a lot of distribution, but you need to improve profitability. So I'll give it a few seconds here for people to record their answers. All right, well, one that's near and dear to my heart, winning placement with retailers, yes. Yeah, it continues to be complex to identify the right retailers and then, of course, knock down the doors to get into those retailers. And growing sales is also, it looks like that's a close second there. Once you get into the retailers, figuring out how to grow your sales is another key one. So thank you for those responses. All right, so I want to start by sharing a bit of an analogy of how I think about retail. I think of retail as a fancy sports car. If you take the time to figure out how to drive, work the gear shift, when to accelerate, when to brake, how to corner, you can go really fast, you can accelerate, you can have a lot of fun, you can win the race. At the same time, imagine stepping behind the wheel of a powerful sports car, and the first thing you do is you step on the gas before you've learned the fundamentals. You might look like this poor chap that crashed his car, and then you're back to burning cash. So again, retail is very powerful. It can help you accelerate. It can help you sell a lot of product, but you have to have the fundamentals in place really before you hit the gas and try to accelerate. I also want to talk about the changing role of retail over the course of my career in the past couple decades. So, 20 years ago, as a consumer, if I wanted to learn about the latest technology, I might walk into a local Best Buy store, maybe even a CompUSA or a Circuit City. And I would walk down the aisle and I would actually physically pick up the products. I would see what competitive products are on the shelf. I would read the box and I would make a decision about what product to buy to a large extent based on what I saw at the brick and mortar retail store. Consumers' consideration process, their discovery process and understanding what product to buy has changed a lot in the course of the past 2 decades. So now most consumers will start their consideration process outside of the store. By the time they walk into the store, they've already looked at websites, they've read reviews. And so the implication here is before you ever get into a brick and mortar retail store, make sure that your online presence is strong. You figured out the fundamentals, why people buy your products, how to message that product, and then you can go into the brick and mortar retail store. Industry consolidation, as Ted mentioned, has also become pretty significant. So it used to be that when I would start selling a product into retail, if I wanted to reach 80% of my addressable market, I had to get on an airplane, go to a dozen different cities, meet with 10 or more retailers, and then I could potentially reach 80% of my addressable market. Today, there's been a lot of consolidation. There's some benefits. As an example, now if I get to Minneapolis and Seattle, I can probably work with enough retailers to get to 80% of my addressable market. At the same time, it means that each individual retailer is that much more important. So if I launch a trial with a given retailer and it's not successful, it's pretty hard for me to make up that volume somewhere else. So again, before you launch a trial with a particular retailer, make sure you understand the fundamentals, make sure you have the resources available to be successful at that retailer, and then you'll have the best chance for success. Another difference is that transparency is high, both in terms of product reviews and pricing and promotion. 2 decades ago, I might have gotten away with launching a good but not great product at a retailer as long as I had a strong brand and I could get pretty broad distribution. Today, I don't care how strong your brand is. If you launch a product and it gets 2.5, 3 stars on Amazon, you're not going to sell a bunch of inventory. You're not going to sell a bunch of sales, get a bunch of sales. So really, you have to make sure that your product is fully baked, that it delivers on the promises. If your marketing says it does X, Y, and Z, but really it only does X and Y, and you're still working on Z, maybe pause before you try to expand broadly. Pricing and promotion is also transparent. Again, 20 years ago, I might have been able to get away with running a promotion with one particular retailer. Today, if I run a price promotion with a given retailer, even if they're a small one, it's not long before Amazon is likely to match. And once Amazon matches, then everyone else follows. So any promotions, any price changes you make need to be on a national basis for any given product. All right, so what are those core things you need to learn before you expand broadly? Well, it's really the basic product market fit questions. So who is your core consumer and why are they going to buy your product? What are the demographics of your consumer and what are the behaviors? What is the right price point and promotional strategy? How do your customers learn about your products? And then once they learn about your products, how do you nurture them through your consideration cycle all the way from awareness to interest to purchase? Does your product deliver on its promises? Again, if you say your product's going to do these 3 things, make sure it really does those 3 things. And here's kind of a pro tip. What does your product's seasonality curve look like? So in this slide, I have a graph of a seasonality curve from a product that I worked with earlier in my career. It was a sub $100 consumer electronic product, and it was a very giftable item. So as you can see there, we sold half of our total units in the last 2 months of the year. So from a forecasting perspective, this is really challenging. So many times the manufacturer has to decide in June or July how many units you're going to build for the holiday season. So you can get those units into retailers in September and October and sell through them in November and December. So if you understand your product's seasonality curve, or at least the category seasonality curve, you can use this as a way to help forecast more efficiently. So say I'm sitting in July and I look at my May and June sales. Well, if I know my seasonality curve, I know that my sales from those 2 months should equal about 13% of my year's sales, whereas November, December is half of my total sales. So I can just multiply by 4 and I can get a pretty good idea of how many units I should build for Q4. All right, so where do you get answers to these questions? Well, I'll give you a hint. It's probably not brick and mortar retailers. Brick and mortar retailers, again, are great at driving volume, but the feedback loop is pretty poor. And the amount of time it takes to actually implement anything you learn can take a really long time. So compare that, for example, to your own website where you have almost complete information. On your own website, you can do A/B testing on messaging. You can do A/B testing on pricing. As soon as you learn something, you can implement it almost right away. So your own website gives you the best opportunity to test and learn about messaging, about pricing, about promotions, really understand what works and what may not work. And then you can implement those quite quickly to see how that works. Amazon is typically the next step. So the way in which consumers will shop at a place where you have competitive products just one click away may be different from the way in which they shop on your own website. So part of the reason you want to go to Amazon or another online retailer is to understand how your core consumer interacts with your product and your core product messaging when there's a competitive environment. One nice thing about Amazon specifically, they do have quite a few tools that can help you actually test those core messages, understand who's buying. And again, online retail is a good place to learn to take those things and then put them into practice when you expand more broadly at brick and mortar retailers. All right, so when is it time to accelerate? Again, once you've validated those fundamentals, once you've figured out the sales and marketing questions, who's your core consumer? Why do they buy your products? what's the right pricing and promotional strategy, and when the cost to acquire a customer is in line with your business plan. So I think it's a common misconception that if you can get your product in a lot of doors, you'll naturally sell more units and do so more efficiently. You certainly may sell more units if you expand your distribution, but typically it is actually less efficient to sell at brick and mortar retail than it is online. So if your business model says you can spend $20 to drive a sale and you're spending $30 online, that's probably not the right time to expand to brick and mortar retail. You got to get your customer acquisition cost in line before you try to expand broadly. Again, brick and mortar retail is like a fast race car. It can help you go really fast, but it also guzzles a lot of gas. And finally, you really got to make sure you have the right operations and logistics in place to support your growth. So, Michael, again, I know that's your area of expertise. I'll hand it off to you.
All right, thank you, Mark. So before jumping into some more content, we have another poll question for the audience. So this one reads, what is your biggest operations and logistics pain point with your sales channels today? Balancing supply and demand relative to sales forecasts, meeting retailers and other sales channels' operational requirements, mitigating penalties, fees, and chargebacks for non-compliance, getting the right information and data from your sales channels to support your business needs, transportation, getting product to the right place at the right time, and then lastly, we have here reverse logistics, managing returns and product rework. So we'll give it some time here. Very interested to see what people have to say here. And hopefully I'll be able to answer some of the questions here. All right. Overwhelming support for balancing supply and demand relative to sales forecasts. Almost half the respondents there. It's pretty good. And then transportation, another big piece. Great. So I'm going to hit on those two things in the next slide. Reverse logistics. Don't have much there, but maybe if we can get some questions in that in the Q&A section, I can hit on that. So, all right. So, all right. You want to expand, right? Well, you got to figure out your operations capabilities before you can do that, right? You want to execute. So I think first off, I just want to start with the goal, right? What is the goal when you're building out your supply chain network, your distribution network? And to me, it's really about understanding the trade-offs between costs and responsiveness, and then also the costs of unfulfilled orders versus having too much inventory on hand. So in this next kind of slide here, I've touched on 4 areas that I think are, places you should consider before making the leap and expanding into the retail channel. So I think the first one is the most difficult. It's really understanding the interplay between supply and demand. And unfortunately, those two sides of the equation are rarely in perfect sync. On the supply side, again, that's really where operationally your organization can make a change, make an impact. So that's where you look to your operations organization. And on the demand side, it's really where you're going to have to work with your commercial leaders, your sales teams, really to understand some of the things that Mark's already talked about regarding seasonality, velocity, and the like. So on the supply side, some of the things that, from an operations standpoint that I think are worth considering and really understanding deeply the answer to these questions is first and foremost is how quickly can you bring the product to market, or how quickly can you get it to the retailer's door, right? And that all starts with the supplier. So when you're taking a look at your supplier network, one of the questions I always have is, well, how reliable is that supplier network, right? And reliability isn't necessarily always around hitting cargo ready dates, right? Reliability also comes down to, are they producing the right SKUs at the right quantities, right? So if you think about the life cycle of a shipment, it all starts at the supplier. And again, you really want to evaluate the reliability of your supplier within your network. The second thing is just how you're going to get your inventory into the country, right? You have a lot of options, air, ocean. With air, again, you have something that's very quick, but unfortunately very costly. On the ocean side, you have the reverse, right? So again, understanding those trade-offs between cost and responsiveness is huge, but then also understanding the risks of stockouts, right? Or your reputation with a particular retailer. And then lastly, once you get the product into the country, right, how do you build out the transportation network to connect it all? The transportation network is hugely important. If you think about suppliers and warehouses and ports as the nodes, the transportation network is the thing that connects those nodes. Then if you look at the demand side, again, I don't want to go too much into this, but again, you need to be able to match supply and demand, obviously looking at things like seasonality, velocity, the breadth of your product catalog. These are all things that you should be considering when you're trying to actually, again, develop your distribution network. And what I'll say here is from a supply and demands perspective, again, they're not going to be in perfect sync always. So the role of your distribution network is to be able to manage the fluctuations in supply and demand to, again, make sure that customer orders don't go unfulfilled, and then also make sure that your costs of goods sold are managed properly. Stepping into the next thing that I would kind of consider, decide on the complexity with which you want to go into the retail market with. Again, kind of a decision that you have to go into jointly with your commercial teams, but how many SKUs and into which retailers are you going to? Not rocket science about what I'm about to say, but obviously as you increase the number of SKUs and the number of retailers you're going into, you're increasing the permutations and the risk within your supply chain, right? So from my perspective, Mark talks about, testing and expanding. I think even when you decide that you want to go into retail, it's a very good thing to kind of test in the retail channel and expand from there. So my suggestion, minimize complexity to start, okay? I think it does two things. One, it allows you to gain trust with the retailer and your customers. And then secondly, it allows you to build confidence within your own organization around your operations before scaling. The third thing to consider is just inventorying your existing capabilities, right? You're probably fulfilling orders some way, somehow right now, right? You're doing e-com, you have an infrastructure set up, you have processes set up, you have systems set up to be able to do that now. Depending on your strategy and where you want to go, it's just doing a simple gap analysis, like where are you today, where do you want to go, and where are those gaps, right? And at this point of the exercise, what I see happen most often is that, the brands, have to make a decision. Is this something that they're going to manage in-house, or is this something that they're going to work with a 3PL with? Most oftentimes when you're looking at a, SMB or emerging, customer, most oftentimes they're going to look to a 3PL to be able to do that. The experience isn't there in-house, and there's a large number of 3PLs who do this, who do it well, and can really help you and your organization make sure that you execute on the requirements operationally that the retailer has. So really quickly, if you decide to go to a 3PL, just some quick, tips here around vetting. Pretty standard stuff, but it's a discovery process. When you're going and looking at a 3PL, ask the questions. Who are your clients? Can they provide referrals? What retailers are they distributing into currently? And does that match your strategy and where you're going? And then lastly, can they provide metrics on client churn as well as client retention, right? So those are the questions that you'd want to be asking. But on the flip side, you want to make sure that your 3PL is also asking you good questions, right? If a 3PL is asking you good questions, it's usually a sign to me that, one, they've been through this before. Two, that they can execute on your requirements because they're extracting the right answers out of you to be able to understand what needs to get done and aligning with your strategy. And then thirdly, which I think is, very important, that maybe doesn't always get called out, is that they can price the projects or your business out better, right? You want to be able to manage your margins, and the more information that you give to your 3PL, obviously the better pricing that you can get. The last thing I'll say here on vetting a 3PL, if that's the route you decide to go, is just go and, ask to do a tour of their warehouses and their facilities, right? Conducting a simple eye test can go a long way. Clean facilities, organized facilities, facilities that prioritize security and safety are good indicators of how your inventory is going to be treated if you don't own it in your own supply chain, right? So the goal is to get the inventory to the retailer, not damaged, in the quantities that they want within the specifications that they require, right? So if you're going to go contract it out to a 3PL, my suggestion is visit their sites, take a look at these things again, because how they treat their own facilities and other clients' cargo is a good indication of how they're going to treat your own cargo and how it will show up at the retailer's door. All right, so you've understood the supply and demand and the dynamics between the two. You're deciding on the complexity. You've inventoried your existing capabilities. You've done some type of gap analysis. Right now, you need to build the infrastructure, right, before expanding. So building the infrastructure, again, is the physical infrastructure. What are the warehouses? Where do I need to be located? And how do I connect it all with the transportation network? I think the transportation network is one of those things that's an unsung hero in this whole thing that makes this thing work. With respect to your transportation network, if you go the 3PL route, don't always assume that the 3PL is going to provide the transportation network. And if they do, don't always assume that it's reliable. On the flip side, a retailer may provide you with a transportation network, carriers that they want you to work with or that they require you to work with. Again, just because they give that network to you doesn't necessarily mean it's reliable. So again, get very familiar and comfortable with the transportation network, because honestly, that is the thing that connects it all together to make sure that things are working smoothly. I'll finish this off with the last piece, which is systems. There are so many different people that are going to be touching your product throughout the supply chain operations. There's the suppliers, there's the truckers, there's the warehousemen, there's all these different people, and they're all going to be running on different systems. So having an understanding of how these systems will work together, how you're going to have visibility and how your partners are going to have visibility into inventory in transit, orders, receipts is hugely important. And I think the other thing to consider is how are all those systems going to talk to one another, right? Too often I see data being transposed manually between systems, and obviously that's a gap, that's a risk. You don't want that to be happening. So building out your physical infrastructure, the nodes and the trucking network to be able to connect those nodes is just half the battle, right? Making sure that from a systems perspective, it's all connected is hugely important, hugely beneficial. I'll end this kind of piece on the operations with a research and a study that I just saw done by PwC, which was saying digital champions investments are 8% more productive on the revenue side and 7% more productive on the cost side. So basically, again, it's this highlighting the importance of systems, highlighting the importance of visibility and transportation within your operations, and ensuring that you have that end-to-end visibility, right? It's going to pay dividends with you, both from the top line as well as the bottom line. All right, and with that, I'll pass it back to Mark to go through the rest of the slides.
Thanks, Michael. All right, so now you figured out the fundamentals. You know who your core consumer is, why they're going to buy your product. You got your pricing and promotional strategy in place, and you've got your operations ready to go. So how do you choose the right retailers? Well, my first trick is that the 80-20 rule is still alive and well. Most brands that I work with will find that the top 2 to 4 retailers are going to represent 80% plus of their sales. Chasing the long tail can make you dizzy. That's another thing I like to say. So I have many stories of working with small regional retailers where I actually spent more time working with them, trying to get them up and running to get 10% of the sales. So again, focus your energy on those biggest retailers that are going to drive the most volume. A common misconception also is that more doors equals more sales. More doors definitely equals more complexity, and it can equal more sales, but there's also cannibalization to worry about and share shifting your sales from one retailer to another. An example I experienced with this, working with Best Buy, launched a product. We were selling about a unit per store per week, which makes us happy, it makes Best Buy happy. We then opened up a couple new doors, and suddenly our sales at Best Buy fell from a unit per store per week to about 2/3 of a unit per store per week. Our total sales went up, but we were share shifting some of those sales to other retailers. And so now some of those marketing opportunities we previously had with Best Buy when we were meeting their expectations became harder to achieve because we were a little bit below the targets that Best Buy wanted to achieve. So again, more doors doesn't necessarily equal more sales. It can, but it certainly equals more complexity. And you also have to be wary of cannibalization and share shifting your customers from one retailer to another. All right, so what are the filters I use when I think about which retailers to choose? Again, looking at some of the biggest retailers here, I think about, first of all, of course, how many units can they sell? Can they drive a lot of volume? If there are 3 to 5 retailers that are going to matter, make sure you're working with those retailers that can drive 80% plus of your volume. If you're launching a new product, and especially if you're launching a new category of products, make sure you're working with a retailer that can efficiently and effectively tell your product story. So this is a bit of a matrix that I put together to talk about how I think about this. You know, if you think about a retailer like an Apple Store or a Beta or your own website, they have an amazing ability to tell your product story. They have a lot of tools that help you tell your new product story. You know, compare that to a Walmart or a Target, which is great at driving volume, but you're not going to find someone to tell you about the new product walking into a big box retailer. So the one exception to this I found is Amazon. Amazon does have a number of tools which helps you tell your product story efficiently. And it's not uncommon that Amazon is going to be the biggest retailer you work with, even after you're in all the retailers you want to be. A couple other important things to consider, of course, is, are the retailer's demographics aligned with your own? So if you're selling a consumer electronic product, Best Buy is a natural fit. If you're selling a health and beauty product, it's probably not going to be Best Buy, but Target makes sense. And then what's the overall cost of doing business with each retailer? Some big box retailers, you can figure out a way to work with them for maybe 30% of your MSRP. Other retailers, specialty retailers, they're going to want 50% plus margin once you factor in all the various costs. So what does your business plan allow for? Can you afford to work with those specialty channels, or do you need to think of that really as marketing and then work with the big box retailers to drive volume? All right, pro tips. So everything in here is a lesson I learned the hard way. So do what I say, not what I did. One of those first things I learned is that getting onto a retailer shelf, it's really 10% of the battle. Everybody loves flying out to a retailer, having a successful meeting, getting the first order, high-fiving. That's just the start. The hard part isn't sell-in. The hard part is sell-through. So getting the product off the retailer shelves and into the hands of consumers is really where your team needs to be focused. And so if you figured out all those fundamentals we touched on earlier, that's what's going to allow you to drive sell-through, and ultimately it's sell-through that drives sell-in. Figure out those fundamentals before you expand broadly. Another lesson learned the hard way here, your forecast is wrong. The day I get my forecast right is the day I buy a lottery ticket and say goodbye to all y'all. So recognizing that your forecast is wrong, you need to weigh strategically, is it better to build more inventory so you make sure you don't leave any sales on the table, but you may find on January 1st, you're sitting on a bunch of inventory and your cash is tied up in that inventory? Or is it better to be more conservative and bet a little wider and recognize you may leave sales on the table? So that's a decision that will be made on a case-by-case basis. But just recognize your forecast is wrong, and then you need to decide, is it better to have a little too much inventory but not leave sales on the table? Or is it better to be more conservative and not have cash tied up on January 1st in your inventory? I touched on this before. More doors does not necessarily equal more sales. It certainly equals more complexity, but you have to keep in mind that cannibalization is common, and you want to make sure that you are successful with each retailer you launch. All right, expanding broadly at retail is expensive. Retailers love taking margin. They love charging fees. You're gonna spend a lot of money on marketing with the retailer, and sales teams are expensive. Plus, there's all that inventory you're gonna have to build in June to support the sales in July, the sales in Q4, and you may not get paid for 90 to 120 days. So make sure you have a big line of working capital, whether that's through your VCs, whether that's through a bank, or even through Flexport Capital. Consider working with a manufacturer's rep. So many of you may be familiar with the concept of a manufacturer's rep. For those of you who may not be, manufacturer reps are typically third parties that are based in the city where the retailer is based and is usually staffed by ex-employees of that retailer. So for example, when I want to go sell into Best Buy with a new product, I'll work with a manufacturer's rep that's based in Minneapolis. Again, staffed by a bunch of ex-Best Buy employees, so they understand the people who work at Best Buy, they understand the culture, they have all the back-end systems experience to help new brands sell into a retailer and then manage the ongoing business. And eventually, it actually becomes more efficient to hire your own team, put a national account manager in charge of each of the channels. But frequently, when you're first starting out and you're looking to knock down doors, I know that was the thing that seemed hardest from the poll we did, was actually getting into those retailers. Finding a manufacturer's representative that knows the buyers, understands the systems, can help you craft your story, and effectively manage your ongoing business can be a way to save both cost and complexity. Last thing here, of course, as we discussed, make sure you have the right logistics capabilities in place to support your growth. It's certainly more fun to win the race than to crash the car. So Michael, back to you for some tips there.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I think just two general things here. We've already touched on it, but play the long game, right? So we talked about failing to execute on kind of the retailer's requirements is going to have longer term implications for you as a brand, right? So I think here is, again, make sure you're confident with the decision and your operations capabilities before taking the leap, right? Because the worst thing that you can have is, at least from an operational standpoint, being blacklisted from inbounding freight into that particular retailer. And then the second thing I'll say is again, take time learning the routing guide. Again, you want to protect your margins here, and really these chargebacks and fees could really have an impact on your bottom line. To go even further here, from my experience and what I've seen, the most common chargeback that retailers are giving to brands and suppliers is around the advanced shipping notification, the ASN, and the window with which it's sent, and how it's being transmitted. So just a little pro tip here. This is where I see a lot of dollars being charged back to brands, is around just ASN compliance. So again, play the long game, make sure you can execute before scaling, and then be really, really, in the details, or at least your operations teams are in the details with respect to understanding the routing guides, because again, that will help you protect your margins. So with that, I'm going to kick it back to Ted, and Ted is going to help us moderate a Q&A.
Thanks so much, Mark and Michael. We've had some great questions flow in through the course of the presentation, so I think you got everybody's minds working on these topics. So one that actually kind of harkens back to the first poll that we did. Mark, you said something. You said that sell-through is the real challenge, not sell-in. On the poll question, though, we did see that there was still some struggle, I think, for some of the webinar attendees here on sell-in. You're someone who's had tremendous success selling to retailers. Can you walk me through some of the core elements of a successful pitch to a retailer to get to the sell-in moment?
Yeah, thanks, Ted. Yeah, so the strategy I employ for selling into a retailer is certainly different now than it was when I started 20 years ago. So again, it's understanding all the fundamentals. The retailer is going to want to make sure that you have thought through all the pieces that I mentioned. You understand product market fit. You understand the messaging, that you have a plan in place to actually drive sales. So, again, I think some early brands I've worked with that haven't sold into retail before operate under the misconception that getting product on the shelf drives sales. So the retailer is going to want to make sure that you understand you have a strong marketing plan in place to get those units off the shelf and into the hands of consumers. So that's all consistent with what I experienced 20 years ago. What's different now is that you have retailers like Amazon that share their relative ranking data. So a cheat I would say I use is if I can launch on Amazon and drive meaningful sales there and get a good review score and move up within the category, I can walk into pretty much any retailer in the world. Honestly, it doesn't matter what's in my pitch deck. The first thing any retailer is going to do in a pitch, a buyer is going to do, is go to Amazon. They're going to look at my review score on Amazon. They're going to look at my category ranking. And if I have 4.5 stars and I'm a top 3 product, then my job's already done for me. If I walk into a retailer and the first thing they see is that I've got a 3.5 star product and I'm number 500 in the category, it doesn't matter how polished my presentation is. It's going to be very hard to win placement. So it is understanding all those fundamentals. If you're able to launch on Amazon and drive good review scores and have a high ranking within the category, then 80% of your job is done for you. And then it's just making sure that you have all those other fundamentals in place. Do you have a marketing plan to get units off the shelf into consumers' hands? Do you have a customer support team that can support everything that's going on? Do you have the right operations and logistics capabilities in place to meet the routing guides? I'd say those are some of the critical elements.
Mark, you've talked a lot about that sequence, right? So you said, hey, start with your own website, because that's where you're going to get the most experimentation, the fastest feedback loop on how your product's doing, how people are engaging with your product, then progress to something like Amazon, and then progress to retail. I'm curious to know, are there times when you don't recommend that sequence? Or is it possible to skip over steps in that sequence? So how much of that is a universal in your mind versus just sort of a general principle?
Yeah. So I'd say it is a path I've taken that has generally presented the best likelihood for success. I'd say there's a few exceptions, and there are some products where you need to touch and feel the product to really understand how it works. And so there may be times where it's appropriate to get your product into a brick and mortar retailer, a high touch brick and mortar retailer, such as an Apple Store or a Beta, that has the ability to tell the product story if it needs to be experienced in person. One of the companies I mentioned is Eargo. I support their sales, and it's a hearing aid. So you can understand that for a number of people, actually putting the product, having a chance to test the product, put it in their ears, experience it firsthand, is going to have a very outsized impact. So there are some categories of products where it makes sense to accelerate the brick and mortar presence, work with one of these smaller retailers. They can tell your product story much more effectively and efficiently than you'll probably be able to do online if the experiential piece is very high.
And specifically, even on the question of Amazon, I mean, you mentioned it's one of the unique retailers that can drive volume and also tell pretty compelling product stories. I mean, obviously, it's become sort of a behemoth in the retail space. It's just become such an essential retailer to so many brands. What do you actually consider to be the decision? Do I sell on Amazon or don't? What are the conditions on which a brand may actually say that Amazon's not the right retailer or that they don't want to have presence on Amazon? Walk me through the decision logic that a company would go through if they're saying, hey, I don't think Amazon's a fit for me, and why?
Yeah, it's in many ways, I almost feel like Amazon is a difficult retailer to avoid these days. You may have heard more product searches start on Amazon than even on Google. So it is a place that consumers naturally gravitate to learn about new products. They have high credibility with their review scores. I'd say if you are hesitant to launch on Amazon, the question I'd want to understand is why. I've asked that question of certain brands, and the answer has been, we want to maximize our profit. We basically want to sell it just through our own website. I'd say that's a good reason to do it. I've also had the answer that, well, we're not sure the product is fully baked, and we want to be careful because we don't want to go on Amazon and then, wind up having a 3-star review. Because as I mentioned, if you wind up with a 3-star review, that's going to make it very hard to sell to consumers. It's going to make it very hard to sell into other retailers. So I'd say, if there's something unique about your product that's, or you just, you want to be able to really control the environment, have a high touch environment. There may be regulatory reasons why Amazon isn't an appropriate channel. But for the most part, the vast majority of brands I work with do need to be on Amazon, should be on Amazon. And it's a good way to build awareness and credibility. And it's a place where people naturally go. I'll mention one other piece here, which is that Amazon is incredibly democratic when it comes to who can sell their product there. So there have been brands I've worked with that chose not to launch on Amazon. And what they discovered instead is that a third party purchased one of their products, recognized that there was not a listing on Amazon, and through their third party seller accounts, they listed the product on Amazon. So now you have a situation where, as a brand, you've effectively lost control of your messaging because Amazon is so democratic, they will let anyone with a Seller Central account list that product on Amazon. And so you could wind up in a situation where you effectively don't have control over how your product is messaged on Amazon. You have limited ability to control the reviews or respond to the reviews. And it's very difficult to defend against that. So at a minimum, even if you don't plan to sell on Amazon, I recommend establishing a Seller Central account, creating a product page for your product, and at least then you can control the messaging. So if a third party buys your product and decides to sell it on Amazon, at least you've created the listing. And so that information that you input will go live, as opposed to allowing someone over whom you have no affiliation or control to create the listing.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that one of the advantages you've talked about on your own website and on Amazon is the rapid feedback that you're getting. And I know that in brick and mortar, the feedback loops aren't as robust. You're not getting as much feedback on sell-through. So can you explain to everybody what the feedback loops look like for brick and mortar retail? As a business owner, what type of information are you given that allows you to tweak your strategy, change your marketing message as you're actually launching into brick and mortar?
Yeah, so it's brick and mortar retailers are getting better, certainly. I'd say the baseline data that you get from a brick and mortar retailer, unfortunately, isn't that helpful in solving those core questions. So it's not uncommon that the only information you get from a brick and mortar retailer is sell-through. How many units, on a weekly basis, how many units did I sell through? Maybe they break it down on a store-by-store basis. So, you may be able to glean some information geographically. So if your brick and mortar retailer is able to share sales on a geographic basis, you may be able to do some analyses to understand, does your product do better in high-income neighborhoods, in cities versus rural areas? But generally the feedback loop is pretty limited. It's primarily sell-through and potentially on a store-by-store basis. Some retailers, Target as an example, has recently launched advertising through Criteo, and that's more akin to maybe Amazon's advertising program. So you can start to test different keywords. You can start to bid against search terms. So I'd say with the online arms of brick and mortar retail, you can start to glean more information. But again, most of the big box retailers, their online arm is not the prize. The prize is in store. So it's not unreasonable to run a test with the online arm of a brick and mortar retailer in order to understand how that particular brands or retailer shoppers engage with your products. But again, the prize is not selling at Target.com as an example. The prize is getting into stores and understanding. So you may be able to learn something about how a Target guest, Target shopper differs from your other channels by launching on Target.com. But ultimately, the most important thing is understanding how that translates into the store environment. Again, that's really the price.
Great. And we're going to take a little bit of a different direction and move on to some operations questions here, because we've had some flowing in. And Michael, maybe you can help chime in on this one. I know I certainly have a perspective on this as well. But we have a question about transit times, and especially how they've changed recently. So the question was really about saying, getting to LA on the water hasn't been recently as it has been maybe in the past, but once you actually get outside LA, the time that it's taking to get to, say, an FBA location used to be 7 to 10 days, and now it's taking a month to actually get your product to the FBA location. And the question is sort of what's driving this dynamic where we're seeing so much dwell after the ocean leg has taken place, and when do we think that it will abate? So when do we think we're going to be going back to more normal conditions for essentially destination transit times?
Yeah, so I think, we can expect this probably for the foreseeable future. I think a lot of this has to do with just the lingering impacts of COVID. And until we kind of get COVID under control, I think we'll continue to see kind of these delays happen through the supply chain. Why COVID is having an impact, it's really just the shift in consumer spending, right? Shifting from, services now to more goods. It's just creating this bottleneck within the supply chain. And, when bottlenecks start to bunch up, unfortunately, sometimes it takes a lot of time to kind of release the pressure, right? Unless there's a lot of additional capacity that can be added into the marketplace. So unfortunately, I think it's going to be happening for the foreseeable future. Maybe come summer, if we get a little bit better around vaccinations and things of that nature, we might see some relief there. But in understanding why it's happening, right? I think, you can kind of just start from it from a destination perspective. It all just starts at the port. Ships are making their way into LA, but unfortunately, they're not being unloaded, within a timely manner. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the port and the port workers, right? Port workers getting sick, not coming into work because of the risks that are there. So unfortunately, right, if your labor force isn't showing up, a bottleneck is created. And again, until you can increase capacity in that bottleneck, unfortunately, it still, remains narrow. And then that has downstream impacts. You then go, okay, we're having delays at port. It creates a little bit of a jam up there. Then it goes and filters down to the truckers and the drayage providers. Same thing. They're having equipment shortages. How are they going to, get containers and stuff back to port? The chassis and the situation with chassis shortages. Again, unless you can increase capacity, or there's just a real big slowdown, unfortunately, it's just the reality that you have to deal with for the foreseeable future. And then the last thing here is then it flows into the warehouse, right? If you look at warehousing right now, labor is at a premium. There's a lot of competition in the warehousing space for workers, again, for all those things that I said, right? People have a risk of coming into work. That means that there's maybe potentially reliability issues. If you can't staff your building with, reliable workers who are going to show up day in and day out, unfortunately, that just kind of creates bumpiness in the market. So overall, I think, again, what we'll have to deal with is we'll just have to wait for the consumer spending to shift, right, to kind of have a slowdown kind of in that place. And then from an operations perspective, we just need people to return to work and equipment to get back, so that, again, we can just kind of unwind the bottleneck that has been going on for quite some time, quite candidly. So, Ted, I don't know if you have any other color that you want to add there.
Yeah, I think you really touched on it. I mean, I think it's a number of factors. First and foremost being consumer spending is very high. So when demand is sky high, it's going to put pressure on the system. And then we're seeing blocks at a couple steps. One is labor, and then one is just sort of the physical assets that are required to do the transportation moves and to do the warehousing. And as you can imagine, a lot of people are buying things on Amazon. So if you're talking about specifically getting to FBA locations, delivery appointments are much harder to come by right now than they were pre-COVID. And so you're seeing sort of like little points of friction at each step, whether it's labor, physical assets, warehouse capacity. And really, it's driven by a confluence of factors, namely demand, and then COVID protocols and the effect that that's had throughout. Now, when those abate, we're going to go back to more normal transit times when those conditions let up. And so, my best advice to you is talk with your freight forwarder. Your freight forwarder should be providing you market updates. They should be giving you a sense for how long, ships are waiting outside of Port of LA or wherever it might be before they're actually berthing and discharging containers. And so really spend time talking to your freight forwarder, because they should be giving you good advice on how transit times have changed recently that you can then work back and say, okay, well, I know that if I need to add in an extra 2 or 3 weeks on my transit time, that has an impact on the rest of your supply chain. So follow those market updates, talk to your freight forwarder is some good advice there. Michael, one other question for you on the operations end. Can you talk about some of the differences in sort of the distribution and fulfillment networks that someone might consider if they're doing direct to consumer versus wholesaling and how does that actually affect the operations model that someone may undertake?
Yeah, so I think you touched on it a little bit. It's like that concept of the routing guide, right? The consumer, obviously, if you're doing D2C, is not going to necessarily have specifications of how they want to receive their product. They just care that they're going to receive their product within the time expected, right? So I think from that perspective, the D2C distribution channel is like, yeah, there's a time requirement, but then everything else is like, it's up to you, right? What packaging you get them into, the specifications, who you use, FedEx, UPS, USPS. Again, those decisions are largely up to you and to your network. So I think, again, because that's more in your control, then it becomes a little bit easier to deal with. So from my perspective, again, there's a little bit more control in the D2C aspect because you don't have to deal with these complex routing requirements, right? A consumer's not going to come to you and say, hey, I have these 20-page thing that you need to review before you actually put it at my doorstep. So I think that's kind of, one of the bigger differences. I think also from a D2C perspective, it's just, kind of what you're moving is different, right? So when you're talking about D2C, you're generally moving, eaches or individual units, whereas is when you're wholesaling, you're moving things at kind of like a master carton level or at a pallet level, right? So the people that you're dealing with in the supply chain is a lot different, right? From a carrier perspective, you could be using small parcel carriers, FedExes, USPSs, and UPSs, right? But if you're going into wholesale, you could be using FTL and LTL carriers, right? So I think that the other kind of differences between the two is just who the players are in the marketplace and who you'll be interacting with within the supply chain, right? So I just gave an example about a trucker, but even in the warehouse space, there's certain 3PLs that strictly focus on kind of D2C fulfillment. There's some 3PLs that really focus on the retail side of the house. So depending on kind of your strategy and how you want to sell, you obviously want to align with a 3PL that has experience with one or the other, or even multi-channel fulfillment, right? Because that's becoming a requirement a lot with brands, is being able to sell through obviously e-com as well as retail. So those are just a couple of the few things that I noticed between the differences between D2C and going into retail.
Well, Michael and Mark, thank you so much for leading us through this content. I know that I always get a lot out of talking to both of you, and I hope that all the viewers today did as well. We are at the end of the webinar. If we didn't get to your question, we will follow up with you. So expect an answer from us if we didn't get to answer your question live. A sincere thank you from the teams at Flexport and OnTap for talking to us today about this incredibly important topic of getting your product in the hands of customers. Getting those magic moments, seeing the smiles on customers' faces is what we all live for. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great rest of your week.